Nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Itam Shri Radhika Prana Nata Pada Sarojayo Yena Premanubhutyasha Dattam Tam Shri Gurum Bhaje. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shashvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomura Kelato Bande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Murdna Nipatyakshito. Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripa Krite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Kuladi Devatamor Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Vandan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puran Krishna Dasa Kaviraja Rasika Bhakta Maj Jai Rachilo Caitanya-caritamrta Gaura Govinda Lila Shunite Galai Shila Tahate Na Hoilo Morachita Jeba Nahi Bhuji Keba Shunite Shunite Seha Kiad Bhuta Chaitanya Charit Krishna Upajibe Priti Janibe Raserariti Shunile Borohoihit Shriyatam Shriyatam Nityam Gyatam Gyatam Mura Chintyatam Chintyatam Bhaktash Caitanya-caritamrta. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana Prayojana Avatar Prema Purushottam Karuna Mahasagar Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu and his beloved Parshad, nourished by Shri Rup, Shri Sanatan and Shri Raghunath, an exalted songbird in the inexhaustible sky of Gaura Lila, Shri Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Pad. Again, today we'll continue our discussion of Sri Caitanya-caritamrta. And we resume in the Madhya Lila Sanatan Shiksha, chapter 22, on the subject of the Abhidheya. And we're here in the Prakaran on Sharanagati. So the month before last, when we left off, we had come to this section where Mahaprabhu has spoken about Shraddha, he's spoken about Sadhu Sangha, he's spoken about Asat Sangha, and now he's speaking about Sharanagati as a prelude to the remainder of the chapter where he explains the process of sadhana bhakti. So in the last reading we looked at the commentaries given on the verse 1866 in Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dharman Parityaja, as Mahaprabhu cites this as a evidence from the Shastra to support or to give reference for the concept of taking shelter in Bhagavan. So there, the how and why a bhakta is not implicated in entanglement in karma or sin as a result of neglecting their various responsibilities within the Varnashram society for the sake of taking shelter in Krishna, and the benefits that can come to a bhakta were described therein. So now Mahaprabhu brings the discussion to the other side, to the shelter, to the person in whom the shelter is being taken. So today we'll look at a verse spoken by Akrura, which conveys to us why Sri Krishna is so worthy of being taken shelter in. Because one might do well if one lacks shelter to come to shelter, but when taking shelter, you need to be sure that the shelter you're taking is actually solid. You don't, if you're out in the ocean and then you jump in a boat, but the boat is leaking and sinking, that's not really going to help you. So if you're going to take shelter, you need a solid one. So why is Krishna so solid? Or what is so wonderful about Krishna that he's most worthy of being taken shelter in? That will be the subject of our discussion today. So I start from Payar 95. This should be at the top of the fresh file. So I'll just, the last sentence here, just introducing the verse. In the following Payar, Srimad Mahaprabhu specifies why Sri Krishna in particular, and not other devatas, is most worthy of being taken shelter in. The tippani introduces this Payar as follows, quote, take shelter solely in Krishna, loi Krishnaika sharan. He shows this, Bhavartha-dipika, or he demonstrates why one should do so in the following Payar. So in the previous verse, he'd said, Akinchana hoya laho Krishna sharan, or Krishnaika sharan, that take shelter solely in Krishna, being akinchana. And we discussed all the different meanings of that previously. So, Bhaktavatsala Kritagya Samartha-vadanya, Heno Krishna Chari Pandita Nahe Bhaje Anya. Affectionate to bhaktas, grateful, capable, and munificent. A wise person does not leave Krishna of such nature and worship anyone else. So in other words, Krishna is worthy of being taken shelter in because he has these qualities. The qualities of being affectionate to bhaktas, of being grateful, of being capable, and of being munificent. So the tippani explains that, Anya devatantaram panditaha krishnam eva bhajanti iti artaha. Quote, anyone else refers to other devatas. The wise worship Krishna alone. This is the meaning. To evidence that Bhagavan Sri Krishna is replete with the four qualities mentioned in this Payar, and thus supremely worthy of being taken shelter in, Srimad Mahaprabhu cites next a statement made by Akrura when Bhagavan Sri Krishna personally visited his home in Mathura. So as you'll see, this list of qualities given in the Payar is pulled directly from this statement in the Bhagavatam. So we'll read this statement and then we'll look at the commentaries of the acaryas where they illuminate the significance of these qualities. Kapanditas tvaraparam sharanam samiyad bhakta priyadrita gira suhrida kritagyat sarvan dadati suhrido bhajato bikaman atmanam apyupachaya pachayona yasya. What wise person would take full shelter in anyone other than you, to whom bhaktas are dear, whose words are truthful, who are well-wishing, who are grateful, who bestow all thoroughly desired objects upon a well-wishing worshipper of yourself, and even your own self upon them, without any accumulation for or diminution of yourself thereby. So, first we'll just map how the Payar fits to the shloka. Sri Krishna is being described here by Akrura as, quote, to whom bhaktas are dear, or bhakta priyat, evidences Sri Krishna's aforementioned quality of being affectionate to bhaktas, or bhakta vatsala. His being described as grateful, kritagya, evidences the mention of the same in the previous Payar. his being described as whose words are truthful, and as, quote, without any accumulation for or diminution of, evidences his aforementioned quality of being capable. And his being described as one, that should be who is, well-wishing, and as you who bestow all thoroughly desired objects upon a well-wishing worshipper, and even your own self, evidences his aforementioned quality of being munificent. So that should be clear. These different qualities mentioned in the shloka are, alluded to by those statements in the payar. So now, the significance, right? In other words, why did these things really matter? How did they touch our hearts? How will this inspire and make a tangible enrichment to our life, or deepen our sense of conviction and appreciation and relish for taking shelter in Krishna, in keeping the mind fixed upon Krishna? So the significance of these qualities and the consequent veracity of Bhagavan Sri Krishna's being supremely worthy of being taken shelter in is illuminated by Sri Jivapad in his commentaries on this verse. So first I have the Lagu Vaishnav Toshani Tika, then the Brihat Krama Sandarbha Tika, and then the discussion he offers of this in the Bhakti Sandarbha. So in each of these three different commentaries, he discusses different aspects of the verse. So collectively, we get a thorough analysis. So just for concision, I'll avoid reading the Mool text, but any questions or comments related to it are welcome. So, quote, "Than he to whom bhaktas are dear, bhakta priyat," means he to whom a bhakta is well known as being an object of love, on account of his bestowing such a position, that is the position of a nurse in his divine abode, even upon Putana, and others, because of their dress and so forth. So this is a little terse. What he means is, Bhagavan is well known to hold his bhaktas dear, since, for example, he bestowed the position of being a nurse in his divine abode, even upon Putana, who was not his bhakta, and rather his would-be assassin, simply because she put on the type of garb worn by his bhaktas as part of her plot to kill him, and thus performed an act that resembled an act of bhakti, performed by one of his bhaktas. This is also described by Srimad Uddhava in the verse Aho Bhakiyam, and that verse is cited right here in the Caritamrta just after this, so we'll discuss that verse in further detail then. So this is wonderful, right? Pundarik Vidyanidhi was tearing off his cloth and breaking his hookah to be reminded of these things, right? So this is an example of what you call Kaimutya Nyaya, where, if to show that a bhakta is dear, even someone who was trying to kill him, but just dressed up and made themselves look like a bhakta, was blessed to this profound extent. So what more does he give to an actual bhakta? What more does he feel to someone who's not attempting to assassinate him, but attempting to express a profoundly rich, endearing offering of love? If he's ready to completely overlook the most heinous act and, embrace someone so intimately and put himself in such an intimate, vulnerable position, literally in the hands of such a person, just because they appeared like, or they unintentionally performed an act that is like the acts of the bhaktas that he holds so dear, then how dear does he hold his bhaktas? So, what would it be like to be one of those bhaktas? What would it be like to receive that kind of love, to be held that dearly? That is the daily life, the reality of Braja Lila. So, as wonderful as this may be, a doubt is raised. Hard to believe anyone still has a doubt just hearing this. Maybe the simple-hearted are already sold, but some may still need further convincing. So no problem, we've got plenty more in store for them. Well, in the case of that fondness of Sri Bhagavan for them, meaning for his bhaktas, a transgression of the vow he has taken of sustaining them shall come about somehow or another as a result of inattention or otherwise. In other words, okay, Krishna promises, I'll protect my bhaktas. Here in the last verse of the Gita, he said, surrender to me and I will save you from all sin. Elsewhere he says, Yeya tamam prapadyante tangstataiva bhajamyaham, I'll reciprocate with you however you approach me. But come on, is he really going to do that? Is he really going to remember every single time? Is he really going to be on the ball? Is he really completely reliable like that I could actually really trust him with everything? Is it really like that? Or is he going to sometimes forget? Is he going to maybe get distracted? Is he going to be busy with other things? What's really the case here? So to negate someone with such worries, maybe someone who's suffered from neglect in life or have been neglected by their parents or whatever, thinking the people I wanted to support me weren't there for me, so now you're telling me I should trust Krishna, but is he really going to be there for me? So, thus, to negate such a doubt, Akrura says, then he whose words are truthful, Rita-gira, meaning he whose resolve is truthful. That is, whatsoever he resolves invariably comes true. So this is another way, or a kind of a classic Sanskritic way, of speaking of him as being omnipotent, or capable of doing everything or anything, that whatever he wishes, it will come about, because he's endowed with all capability to fulfill that, and of such great capability that he doesn't even have to struggle to achieve what he resolves to do. Simply resolving it is enough to accomplish it. He's that powerful. In other words, what he thinks just becomes real, or just comes into existence, whatsoever he wills. So, that his words are truthful means if he gave these words, then you can take them as completely reliable. You can fully trust those words, because whatever he's said, whatever promises he's made to protect his bhaktas will never not come about. So he will not fail to always sustain his bhaktas, because of his resolve itself being causative of that effect. Even when his absorption in another great bhakta occurs on occasion. So someone might say, okay, if he remembers me, he'll do good for me. But he has millions of bhaktas. He has an infinity of bhaktas. I'm just one little tiny, person in the crowd in front of the celebrity. I'm not really going to always have his attention, am I? So, yes, you are. Don't worry. Even if, and also this would play into the idea of, and I'm not really so great, I'm not really special, I don't really have any great qualities, so there's all these other great bhaktas that are far better than me, so they're all going to get his attention, and I'm just going to be the kind of ho-hum ordinary guy who gets neglected and sits on the fringe. So what hope do I really have? So even though he might become profoundly absorbed in his dealings or his relations with other bhaktas, still he will never fail to look after every one of his bhaktas. So even if Bhagavan becomes completely absorbed in his dealings with one particular bhakta, he will still never fail to also sustain all his other bhaktas at the same time, because his resolve to always sustain them all will always invariably prove true. This is the purport. So he has such capacity that he can be fully there, right there with you, and with everyone else too. There's no limit to the number of people that he can exchange with whom he can exchange love to an infinite degree. So don't worry that he's incapable, or that he won't follow through. Now, the next point comes. And it is not that there is a requirement of worship in the form of service in order to receive his protection, but rather there is the requirement only of somehow taking refuge in him. So it's not that you need to be a great singer or a great ritualist or a great this or a great that or perform anything to earn this. If you just want it, if you just come and avail yourself of it, if you just bring yourself to him and open yourself to that relationship, that's enough. You don't have to have any special merits or qualities or perform any special activities. Thus, he says, quote, then he who is well-wishing, or that he is suhrida, meaning he sustains anyone who takes shelter in him by whatsoever means, even if they do not offer worship or service to him. So it's not that he favors people just because they favor him, he scratches their back because they scratch his, they do good for him, so he does good for them. Not even. Just anyone who comes and wants it, anyone who comes and says, I want to be in your shelter, that's enough. They don't have to, on top of that, provide any added value, so to speak, necessarily. He relishes just that bringing of oneself, just that leaving aside whatever else to be in his shelter and not anyone else's, just that act of being you and bringing yourself in full, that itself is sufficient for him, is relishable to him. And it is not that he will neglect to sustain a particular person because of not knowing of, that is, understanding or remembering, the service which that person has rendered to him. So someone might say, okay, if he'll accept whoever comes, and he doesn't require anything that needs to be done, but will he really appreciate that, or will he even remember me? Will he even really want this? So he's thus described as kritogya, or then he who is grateful. So the word kritogya is a nice word, literally meaning aware of what has been done. So krita, gya. Krita, that which has been done, gya, the one who is aware. So what does it mean to be grateful? It means to appreciate or understand what other people have done or what has happened, to be able to accurately assess the value of things and feel that value, and as well as retain appreciation for that over time. So Bhagavan has that. So don't worry that, he won't be able to attune to you or sensitive to that. Meaning he knows what service has been done for him by anyone and everyone and highly regards it. So this is an additional point, that it's one thing to be grateful in a token sense of remembering what people have done, but it's another thing to actually deeply appreciate the act that someone has performed. So, if I may do a little cultural bridging here, today, at least in North American culture, where it originates, is Mother's Day. So it's a day when people often, feel or reflect on the gratitude that they feel for their mother. So, we'll just say that, many may say, they feel grateful for their mother, but to what extent do they deeply appreciate that, or to what extent or depth is that gratitude, may not be universal. There's a certain capacity involved in really deepening one's ability to value or appreciate what it is that has been done for someone. And in a broad sense, I'll just say that, to the depth to which one has lived a well or a rich life by the care of one's mother, that much one will be able to appreciate what it is that the mother has provided. But if one, if Mahaprabhu says, Prem dan vina vyarta daridra jivan, a poor life is a life with no love, then someone who's had a life rich with love, they'll have the capacity to amply, feel gratitude for the gift of life that their mother has given them. So anyway, pardon me if that's a little off topic, but the idea of gratitude and this point here of Jiva Gosvami, that it's not just that Bhagavan is kritagya in the sense that he's aware of what people have done, but that he deeply regards that. He has great relish and appreciation for that, even as simple as it may be. And of course, the example of Putana given earlier also illustrates that. He has such appreciation for the dress that the people of Braja wear, that he feels such affection, or he shows such graciousness, even to a person who dons that dress without anything beyond that, or even with ill intent. Anyway, so he's Kritagya. Thus, furthermore, even a semblance of service ends up being highly regarded by him. So again, Putana, a semblance of service, dressing up nice while attempting to kill. This was enough. So he's so grateful that he'll appreciate whatever is appreciable about what someone is doing, even if it's the whole of their act or the whole of their behavior is not that appreciable. He'll still look and see whatever good is within it. So thus he says, Sarvan, quote, you bestow all thoroughly desired objects upon a well-wishing worshipper. So he doesn't just, so to speak, highly regard or feel gratitude, but he actually acts on it. Or when we substantially have a deep feeling for something, that will manifest in the form of reciprocation or action. So here he's saying that he's contextualizing this, saying that he gives all desired objects out of that gratitude. This shows that he's so grateful, the fact that he's ready to fulfill the wishes of those who come to him. Akrura then says, he for whom there is no accumulation or diminution, as a result of gaining or losing objects and so on, bestows all desired objects upon a worshipper, that is, one performing worship of any sort, one engaging in service with flowers, leaves, and so on. So in other words, whatever simple thing that one does, he's ready to reciprocate with that, and he's of such divine magnitude and nature that he doesn't lose or gain anything by reciprocating in full with anyone. So he's fully capable of reciprocating with everyone unlimitedly. And it just reminds me, there's a comment of Chakravarti Pad in regard to one of the statements of Prahlad Maharaj to Bhagavan Nrsimhadev, where he's refusing a boon when Nrsimhadev is offering him a boon, and then he's saying this, famous statement, Savai Britya Navai Vanik, that, someone who offers some worship to you and then wants a boon in exchange, he's not a servant, he's a merchant. And Chakravarti Pad gives a nice comment there. He says, not a servant and a merchant means he's doing good business with Bhagavan. He's just giving a few flowers, he's giving a few leaves, and then he's getting, long time stay in Svarga, or he's getting eternal liberation in exchange for what costs a few dollars or what you could pick out in your backyard. So this is a good business plan. You're getting maximum return on your investment. So Chakravarti Pad, anyway, he brings that point. So here you have the inversion of that, where Jiva Gosvami is taking it that Bhagavan is giving all the desired objects in full to someone who worships them howsoever, means with just a little this or little that. So the difference then is that, Prahlad Maharaj, the pure Bhakta, he's not doing this just to get anything from Bhagavan. But nevertheless, for Bhagavan, when he sees that someone is actually doing that just as a gesture of love, he's ready to bestow all of this in reciprocation. So everything then ultimately boils down to the spirit with which it is performed. Anyway, therein, the worshipper is said to be, quote, well-wishing, or surhida, meaning possessed of friendship, or suhridya, or you could just say cordial intent, or, a richness of heart. So in other words, just a simple offering of whatever it is, when it's done suhrida, when it's done with that wealth of heart, or with a sense of friendship, then it says, since he bestows himself even in the form of a friend upon such a worshipper, meaning he becomes subservient to them. So if one gives from one's own heart to him, then he will give of his own self to the giver in return. He'll adopt that same cordial spirit and, self-giving attitude and behavior that the worshipper did. So although Akrura is not a Brajbasi, he is saying this, you could say, in a slightly broader sense than what we see in Brajalila. But, as far as this goes, we can say in Brajalila you get even a more magnified form of what is described here. And, Sanatana Gosvami stresses this particular point repeatedly in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, speaking of, the Brajabasi's bhav as that of worshipping Krishna, who is their prana suhrit, or of their prana bandhu, that he is that most intimate, dear one of their heart, or like as one's own vitality is felt to be essential to oneself, so he is felt to be of that type of immediateness or sense of intimate companionship. So if Akrura is recognizing this quality in Krishna, then how more profoundly is it expressed in Braj? That is my reference point. So, thus, Akrura lastly implies in his statement to Bhagavan that even your coming to my home is not astonishing. So what does he mean? It means, since you bestow all desired objects and even your own self upon those who worship you. So for Akrura, this is the fulfillment of his dreams, or for a bhakta, for Bhagavan to personally come to their home and accept, everything from them, and in one sense to validate the entirety of their life. This is sort of, the fulfillment of all dreams in the case of so many bhaktas and in the lives of so many mahatmas you hear in bhakti lore, so to speak. But here he's saying this is not astonishing, even though it is actually astonishing that he's so captivated by this bhakta that he comes all the way to his home to interact with him so intimately. But he's saying it's not so when it's understood that this is just your very nature to have this type of relish for loving exchange. So, this is the purport, or here, this is Jiva Gosvami's first commentary. So, again, contextualizing this, Mahaprabhu is citing these statements to say why one should take shelter in Krishna. Who is it that we're taking shelter in? So, Krishna of this nature, Krishna of this disposition. So, what could be a better shelter than this? What more could you hope for? Where else should you turn? So, this is the spirit. So, now we'll come to the second comment. This is from the Brihad Kramasandarbhatika. So regarding the verse Kapandita, the meaning is as follows. One, on the contrary, who goes to a shelter other than you is certainly foolish. So Kapandita means what pundit would go to someone other than you? No pundit would. So if a pundit wouldn't, then who does? Well, obviously those who are not pundits. In other words, fools. So who goes to a shelter other than you? The foolish. And of what nature are you? You are he to whom bhaktas are dear, and he whose words are truthful. That you have these qualities is known because of your coming to the home of Kubja and myself, on account of your keeping your promise to do so. So Akrura is saying this during Krishna's visit, so as it's customary to offer some sweet words to your guest, then Akrura is speaking these sweet words of adoration to Krishna after Krishna has visited Kubja and is now visiting him. So he's saying you're proving that you hold bhaktas dear, that you keep your word, because you promised us you would come, and now you have. So you're showing that you hold bhaktas like us dear, that you keep your word. And therefore you are well-wishing and grateful. You bestow all desired objects upon a well-wishing worshipper of yourself. What is the use of more explanation? You bestow even your own self upon worshippers. So if we say, you bestow everything upon bhaktas, well then you might say, well, what exactly does he bestow? Does he give X? Does he give Y? Does he give Z? He's saying, he gives so much, what's the most valuable thing there is to give? It's not your bank balance, it's not this, it's your actual self. So he's saying Bhagavan doesn't just give valuable things, he even gives himself. So what more do you have to say? He's so keen to reciprocate that he goes to the ultimate extent. And what's the proof of that? In that regard, Sairindri, meaning Kubja, is the illustration. Upon her, even your own self was bestowed. Expecting the objection, diminution occurs of bestowal of oneself. So you might say, okay, but if he gives himself to one bhakta, then how's he going to give himself to anyone else? He already gave himself away here. So if you give yourself, you're stuck. You don't have anything else to give. What else are you going to do? So expecting someone might be concerned when this point is made, he says, you are without any accumulation for or diminution of yourself thereby, on account of your being constituted of complete bliss. Now I find this point interesting, because you might expect him here, as far as his cause or his hetu for this point, you might expect him to say, oh, because you're Bhagavan, because you're omnipotent, then you can give yourself to one person and give yourself to another person, and you have that, divine or supernatural power, so there's no loss. But interestingly, that's not the cause that Jiva Gosvami perceives here. Rather, he says the cause of Bhagavan not losing or gaining anything by giving himself is the fact that he's Purnananda, the fact that he's full of bliss. So, my 2 cents on this, or how I understand the intent of what Jiva Gosvami is saying here, is that there's another place, it's cited a couple places in the Sandarbhas, where, Shri Shyadikam Harir Naiva Prayojanam Apekshate Kurute Kevalamanandat Yata Nartasyam Martanam, I think it is. Or Martasya Nartanam, that it's saying that Hari has no need or nothing to gain by engaging in the emanation of the world. So why does he do it? Kurute kevalam anandat. He just does it out of his own ananda. It's just an outpouring of his bliss. And of what type or how is that? Because this is a statement that's referent to this lila to Lokavat to lila kaivalyam, this sutra in the Vedanta, and Shankaracharya compared it to the effortless act of someone breathing in deep sleep. Ramanuja compared it to a prince playing with a ball. But Madhvacharya took it this way, and Jiva Gosvami, Baladeva Dibhushan, they take the example of Madhvacharya, the dancing of a drunk. In other words, when a drunk person is dancing, it's not that they're trying to gain something from the dancing. They're just intoxicated and letting it flow. So it's not that they're, performing even this act of enjoyment to try to get something out of it, or not that they're running this enterprise because they feel unfulfilled and they're trying to become fulfilled, but rather they're just flowing with happiness, and then this action is just an outcome, or is just an outpouring of that happiness. It's not something done to try to gain happiness. So similarly here, if Jiva Gosvami is saying, you are Purnananda, you are so full of bliss, so you don't gain or lose anything, because what's it all about after all? It's all about Ananda. Everyone is ultimately in pursuit of Ananda, or at least trying to avoid the opposite of Ananda. So when you're just completely full of Ananda, then you can just actually give yourself. You can just actually make complete genuine acts of self-giving, because you don't have any need. You're full in and of yourself, and even in that act of self-giving, you don't lose or gain because you're already full, so to speak. So I understand it like in that way, that you can, when he says, so to speak, you bestow yourself upon your worshippers, it means you can reciprocate in full with these people, because there's nothing more blissful than love and loving exchange. And when you're full of this love, then you can just flow with that, and you don't have any calculation of loss or gain, or even right or wrong in these loving exchanges. So, sometimes they say there's no sorry or thank you in a loving relationship. In the sense that if two people are really there out of love for one another, then there's already a presupposed understanding of you know, a plurality of behaviors taking place, and one is, already accepting of whatever permutations may manifest, and is embracing the whole of that in a cordial spirit. So something like this, Bhagavan is giving of himself to these bhaktas, even Kubja, who, I mean, frankly speaking, after you've been with the gopis in Braja and then you arrive to Kubja, you're not going to be impressed. If I may say so. In other words, it's not like Bhagavan had anything to gain in that exchange as such. But you can say, really, only out of, what you can say, like, liberal accepting appreciation did he come to reciprocate with Kubja's interest, because it was as per the Ujjwal Nilamani's analysis, it was of a far inferior stock of amorous expression than found in Braja. So it wasn't that Bhagavan, that there was anything to gain, so to speak, in that, or that it was of some, fine variety for him, but rather, even though it was of a far inferior variety, still he reciprocated with it out of his own bliss. Or even, just as someone might, an adult values adult communication, but occasionally they might talk to a child and communicate at the child's level out of affection for the child. It's not that they're really going to be like, get some, interesting or intellectual enrichment from the exchange, but out of affection, out of kindness, they may have the exchange. So sometimes persons of high taste may even engage in exchanges of lower value, just out of kindness for those who are, at that particular level, or something like that, out of their own joy and out of the richness that they feel from that refined experience that is what is primary in their life. Okay, anyway, a little perhaps excessive elaboration. So now I'll come to the third comment. This came in Bhakti Sandarbha. So Jiva Gosvami further says, "What Pandit would take full shelter in anyone other than you who are well-wishing? On account of your having a beneficent nature. And furthermore in that regard, than you who are grateful, on account of your having great regard even for a semblance of service that you have received from anyone." So these points we've already covered. You are he who, quote, thoroughly, that is, in all respects, bestows all desired objects upon a worshipper, that is, upon one worshipping you. So then it sounds a little bit redundant in the verse, but it's just a grammatical clarification. In this regard, you bestow even your own, quote, your own self, quote, upon a well-wishing worshipper. So again, he's just clarifying the case, meaning one who is possessed of love for you. And it is not that you're bestowing all desired objects in all respects upon worshippers, or you're giving your own self to many of such nature, that is, to many who are possessed of priti for you, that an absence of full intentness on your part in relation to each of your bhaktas shall occur. Thus, he says, without any accumulation for, or diminution of yourself thereby. So you have the capacity to be fully present and fully engaged with every one of your bhaktas simultaneously. You don't lose or gain by giving attention to any one of them. So Krishna's, dancing along with every gopi in the Rasa Lila, snacking along with every cowherd boy on the bank of the Yamuna. These are the general illustrations we know of this principle. So, let me see. I don't know if we have time to go through all of these. I'll try one more. So we also have Chakravarti Pad. So we've gotten some lovely discussion from Jiva Gosvami, but as we know, Chakravarti Pad is no slouch. He's going to come with something interesting as well. So let's give some attention to that. Quote, Tvaraparam means other than you. then you whose words are truthful means then you whose speech is truthful. Then you by whom your own statement, after killing Kamsa, I will go to your home, was proven truthful, is the purport. So he's just contextualizing this point that Akrura says you are truthful words because he promised Akrura that he would come and that he would kill Kamsa, and he did, and then he came. Quote, well-wishing means beneficent. You understand and do that by which the well-being of your servant shall come about is the meaning. So, what does it mean to be suhrit, or to have a heart for someone? It means to see to their well-being, howsoever that may be required. So this is Krishna's nature. Quote, then you who are grateful means you certainly remain aware, even of a very small extent, of even incidentally performed worship of yourself, which has even been forgotten by the bhakta who performed it. So how grateful is Krishna? He'll remember what you did even when you forget. You might not remember what kind of flowers you offered to your Thakur yesterday or last week or last year on this day. I certainly don't remember what type of, incense I offered this day, what type of flowers I offered today. But Bhagavan, he will remember every last offering, every last gesture, every last incidentally performed act of worship, even if you forget. So, plenty of reassurance in that regard. Well-wishing, surhida, in the second instance of the word of the verse, of this word, should be in this verse, modifying bhajataha, means upon one of splendid, alternately bright or auspicious, right psyche, antakarana. That is, upon one who is desireless. So this is interesting. So he's here discussing the word suhrida, or to be of good heart. So he's taking that, suhrida, so hrid to mean the antakaran, or the psyche, the chit, man, buddhi, ahankar complex, and then su to mean bright or right or good, however you want to take it. So he's saying, what does that really mean? That means to be nishkama. So what contaminates the heart? Kama. What makes the heart bright and beautiful and auspicious? Purity, or the absence of kama. So to be desirous of bhakti, to be desirous of Bhagavan, this is the purity of heart, to have desires and intents for other objects. This is the darkening or the graying or the clouding or the polluting of the heart. So a quote, well-wishing worshipper means a person doing bhajan with a pure heart or a pure psyche, one who has undergone the state known as chitta shuddhi. Upon such a person engaging in worship of you, you bestow all thoroughly desired objects, that is, all thoroughly longed for objects, even though they are not wished for by him. That is, even though the worshipper is desireless, that is, devoted to your worship independent of any selfish interests, still you bestow upon your worshipper what is greatly longed for. So someone like, Dhruva or Sudama would be examples of this. And it is not that after bestowing even that much, you desist. And you don't stop there. You don't just give the people more than they even want, because all they really want is just to love you. And even though they just want to love you, you still give them all this facility and opportunity to do so, and all this, indication of how much you appreciate it. But you don't stop there. Thus he says, you bestow even your own self. You even give yourself to them. Here, quote, you is to be supplied. That is, although the verse did not include the word bhavan, it should be supplied while construing the verse. So lastly, I'll just finish this comment. An objection is raised. Well, bestowing even oneself is certainly a great diminution. If you give up yourself, then you lose so much. To this, he says, accumulation and diminution of yourself does not occur. Even when all the substances existing throughout crores of Brahmandas are presented to you by crores of Brahmas and others, no accumulation whatsoever occurs on your part. So even when an infinity of people and an infinity of universes offer you an infinity of things, you gain nothing. And even when the bestowal of objects up to and including even your own self has been caused to you, in other words, even when you give an infinity of things including yourself, no diminution whatsoever occurs on your part. Why not? On account of your being possessed of incomprehensible infinite potency. So this is what I was alluding to earlier when Jiva Gosvami analyzed this from the perspective of Ananda. Here Chakravarti Pad is giving the analysis from the perspective of Shakti. So because he has infinite Shakti, he never gains or loses. So one you could take as a reading based on an ontological aspect. The other you could take on a more emotive or experiential way of describing it. Personally, I quite like the way Jiva Gosvami went with it there in the Brihat Krama Sandarbha, but no doubt both are valuable, and I think Chakravarti Pads is the more common or more standard reading, if you will, what we might expect, and certainly the two aren't mutually exclusive. Okay, so I think we're just about out of time, and I have here also comments from Sanatana Gosvami, so maybe we can dive into those next time, because they're too long to finish today. So I'll conclude here. And again, our theme for today is, why is Krishna so worthy of being taken shelter in? What is the joy of the Sharanagata? As we'll get to later in this Prakaran, Sanatana Gosvami writes at the end of his Prakaran, which we discussed a couple of months back, by saying, Tavasmiti vadan vacha tataiva manasavidan tatstanaman ashritastan modate Sharanagata. The Sharanagata rejoices, knowing in his heart that I am yours, saying so with his speech, and dwelling in Bhagavan's abode. So what is that? To say that the Sharanagata modate, that he enjoys or that he rejoices, then that rejoicing is, an outcome of these qualities of Bhagavan that we've discussed today. When you are in the shelter of someone so wonderful as him, then why would you approach anyone else? What would you gain otherwise? You're gaining everything in full and in an ever fresh way here. So may this discussion nourish the spirit of Sharanagati in the hearts of Bhaktas. So I conclude here. If anyone has comments, questions, corrections, or feedback of any other type, please feel free to share.
Prabhuji?
Yes, Pranam.
So actually I've not been, actually this is the first time I've joined the lecture on Caitanya-caritamrta, so obviously there's a huge backlog, and I'm not really familiar with the text either. So I was wondering if you have any suggestions on how to approach it, if I want to sort of fast track things and learn stuff, if you had any suggestions.
The Charitamrita is something that, as far as the narrative and everything, it can definitely be read without extensive commentary. So just to read through the Mool, Payar translations, if you need translations, or the Payars themselves, if you're familiar with the native language, just that within a brief period can, give you the context of what's going on. In the last, we've been going for a while now, but right now we're in the kind of thickest section that deals with teachings related to sadhana and theology and all of this. So it's been taking a long time to get through this bit.
That's good.
The chapters that describe the narratives and the leelas, those, go in, one chapter goes in just a couple classes. But as you can see, perhaps I'm excessively thorough, but if we come to any verse, I want to see, what does Swami Pad say? What does Sanatana Gosvami say? What does Jiva Gosvami say? What does Chakravarti Pad say? Why did they say this? Why did they say that? Why is it Shakti? Why is it Ananda? I like it. all these different angles and ways of appreciating
Absolutely.
these things are for me, I feel as well time well spent.
No, no,
So
of course, absolutely.
so as we're going through this, in particular, this chapter 22 that we're on now, which has been going for about a year now, is the chapter on the Abhideya, or in other words, the practical thing. So of the whole Charitamrita, this is the most systematic overview of the path of bhakti, if you will. So it's kind of like a consolidation of core elements of the Sindhu and the Bhakti Sandarbha blended together. So that's where we're going through now. So we're in the Sharanagati Prakaran, and then from here we'll go into the Sadhan Bhakti Prakaran, and we'll pull from the commentaries on the Sindhu, the Bhakti Sandarbha, and a few other sources to look at the whole process of sadhana in the coming discussion. So that's what's happening.
Any particular translation that you would recommend?
I mean, there's two.
I mean, I am familiar with Bangla. I should actually specify. I can read Bangla. Like, I think I have a decent grasp on the subject, on the language. So, in case you have any particular one which you think is pretty accurate and which is the right one.
I mean, as far as narrative, there's an edition made by a couple of scholars, Edward Dimmock and Tony Stewart. There's also an edition published by the ISKCON Society. You know, as far as reading the narrative, more or less, either one will do. I can't say I go along with either one 100% on everything, but it's sort of just getting the line of thought. But when it comes to the nitty-gritty of siddhanta, or, you know, the interpretation of the points that actually matter and inform, you know, I definitely think there's still some things to be said with all due respect. So, you know, that's why, you know, I like to give commentary, you know, more or less perhaps painstakingly detailed based on the works of the previous acaryas. So you know, every verse I'm looking at it through the angle of vision of the earlier writers, and I like to reconstruct, or at least attempt to reconstruct, what Kaviraja Goswami's sources were for what he's writing, so that, for example, in this Sanatana Shiksha, you can see where he's pulling from these statements of Samipad, he's pulling from these statements of Rupa Goswami, he's pulling from these statements of Jiva Gosvami, and you can see what was his methodology as to how he brought out this amritam, or this kind of ultimate universal summary in the form of the Charitamrita. So in that regard, to kind of draw out some of those tones, or those, you know, points, that's you know, I feel something that is still, there's still some task there for people who are inspired to take it up.
No, absolutely. So would you recommend that I start reading from the top, or right now, is there any particular section I can start with so that I can at least join the classes and, you know, probably get some more
I mean, frankly, right now we're in this section on sadhana, which is basically out of context. I mean, Mahaprabhu's here in Varanasi teaching at length to Sanatan, and this section will go for the next probably, you know, couple of months. So it's kind of a part of the text that's significantly functional, or the main thrust of it is significant out of context. So I would say it doesn't really matter. Especially, I mean, you're familiar with you know, the teachings in the Sandarbhas and everything, so I would just say you're good to go.
I'm still catching up with the Sandarbhas. I started with the Bhagavad Sandarbha, so I'm still a long way to go. But yeah, I think I'll just join in the classes, and I think I might have some questions. I'll try to limit them so that, you know, at least keep them relevant to the text that you're discussing. And yeah, but thank you so much for your time. It was an amazing class. Loved it.
Cheers. You're welcome, and I welcome, you know, feedback, comments, corrections, whatever. You know, the exchange enriches everything for all of us.
Absolutely. Radhe
Radhe. All right, well, if that's it, I think we can conclude here. So if we're so blessed, next week we'll dive further into these auspicious qualities of our shelter in Sri Krishna. And if we get through that, then we'll come to further discussion here in the Sharanagati Prakaran. Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Radhe Shyam.